Excellencies, distinguished participants, good morning to all of you and welcome to Chulalongkorn campus. As the Dean of the Faculty of Political Science with supervision to ISIS Thailand, it is my pleasure to welcome you and hold this public forum in person. This is the first day that the university has reopened of 3 weeks of closure. So we are all excited and get back to work like we used to. The forum topic today is Myanmar. It is military coup on 1st February has caught many by surprise with far-reaching and long-term repercussions. As Myanmar reaches its 1 month mark today, it is timely to take stock of what has been happening in our next door neighbor and where the situation is headed. By all accounts, the coup has been setback for Myanmar's road toward political liberalization and economic development. Under fluid, precarious and combustible circumstances, which is we can see on the daily news, we will today try to examine post-coup events and dynamic from domestic politics context with Myanmar and regional consequences for ASEAN and Southeast Asia, as well as the global implication in view of China, Russia, and the West. What is the status and road ahead of Myanmar armed forces, also known as the Tatmadaw, and its Commander-in-Chief Senior General Min Aung Hlaing? To what extent can we compare the current protests in Myanmar to 1988 and event 2007? Your views on Tatmadaw, will they get away with it? Do you foresee a threat? What should Myanmar protesters do moving forward? What can ASEAN and international community do? Is Aung San Suu Kyi finished politically, even though protesters are rallying around her? Or will she gain a new lease on politics? Did she make missteps or mistakes? And if so, were they avoidable? What should be Aung San Suu Kyi's roles and place now moving forward under these tense circumstances? What is the role and the future of the ethnic minorities and ethnic arms organization? ASEAN has been in the spotlight because of Myanmar's membership in the regional organization. Is ASEAN ineffectual and will it lose credibility and centrality? Can Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi's shuttle diplomacy and Indonesia law save the day? Why is Thailand relatively muted on Myanmar's coup? And what role do the major powers play and can play? In view of ongoing events, what are the prospects and dynamics on the ground? To what extent is all of this deja vu, and to what extent is new dawn? What are the best or worst case scenarios? These are some of questions and issues that will be brushed and discussed here today. I want to thank to Frederick Naumann Foundation for its continuing support. We are grateful to FNF for enabling us to provide this kind of constructive and impartial platform. I also thank to the speaker, Mr. Aung San, editor-in-chief of the Irrawaddy and former activist in 1988 uprising. Mr. Larry Jacquent, freelance journalist and specialist on Myanmar, former East Asia editor, BBC World Service. อาจารย์นฤมล ทัพจุลพล associate professor from the Department of Government at Chulalongkorn University here คุณกวีจงกิติ Thaworn, senior fellow of ISIS Thailand, and columnist for Bangkok Post, and Miss Gwen Robinson, senior fellow ISIS Thailand, and editor-at-large of the Nikkei ASEAN Review, and also the president of Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand. Let me now turn the floor to Ajahn Thitinan to moderate this discussion. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Khop Kun Kap Ajahn Ek Kap. Thank you very much. Let me proceed now. We have a limited amount of time until 11:30 or so. We'll just come down this way. And, you know, for us journalists, academics, this is kind of what's happening in Myanmar in a way. It's such a big jolt that is a bit exciting to analyze. But in fact, it's deeply disturbing what's been happening. It's dark, it's dirty, and I think we have a lot to discuss. This is a panel that comes after a very disturbing weekend. And Larry Dragon wrote about it in the Bangkok Post today. A score of protesters have been shot and died. You know, they have shed their lives, and the military authorities seem to be cracking down hard and harder now. So let me come down this way and introduce the speakers have already been introduced. You have their bios with you, so I'm not going to go deep into their backgrounds. We also have an online audience at home, so please feel free to write in comments and questions more than comments, and we'll be fielding some questions towards the end. So let me start with Aung San, and let me pick up where Aung San left off when he last spoke for an ISIS public forum, and that was about 11 years ago. During these last 11 years, there's been a remarkable reform, reopening of Myanmar. I think a lot of people had a lot of hopes that there would be some political liberalization, economic progress, and we've seen some of that, but now the plug has been pulled, is off again. So Aung San, you were involved in the 88 uprising in 1988. And then, of course, you had to flee, and then eventually Aung San in 1992 came to Chiang Mai and established the Irrawaddy magazine. If you look at the Irrawaddy, it's a great source of information and analysis on Myanmar and the region. And one of the things that we had a bit of a discussion with last time you were here 11 years ago, that as the Tatmadaw seemed to have loosened its claws a little bit, a lot of people jumped on it, saying that this is a new time and reform. And then over the years, a lot of people have had optimism about the changes. But there were few who never trusted the Tatmadaw and who were always skeptical of the entire reform process. And Aung San is one of them. I would say Bertil Lintner would be another one. And now I have to say that they have been a little bit vindicated by their deep distrust of the Tatmadaw and how this process in Myanmar can flip and overturn just overnight. So Aung San, what we're seeing now in Myanmar, and you're based in Chiang Mai, you have a lot of contacts, I know, and you've been back yourself since 2012. Before that, you were not allowed. What we're seeing is a deja vu for sure, and as the Dean said, deja vu, but would it lead to a new dawn, a new time, or is this going to end up with a dark dictatorship, a lot of violence and bloodshed? And we've seen this before, and it's going to happen again. Do you see things turning out differently this time with the social media, technology, connectivity, and the energy and the commitment and resolve of the protesters so far in this 1 month since the coup now?
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Good to be back here. Also very sad to be back here. And I don't feel vindicated after seeing yesterday's killings and people dying on the streets. I feel very depressed and very disturbed to see what is happening inside Myanmar. We are going back to the old system, I'm afraid to say. And I'm the one of the journalists and people who also drink a different kind of juice, a different kind of smoke in 2012. We would like to believe that the reform was happening, it was real, it was genuine. We like to convince ourselves. That's why we went back to Burma. Burma is my country. I love the country and the people. That's one of the key reasons, the main reason that we decided to go back. Even the first visit, I was given only 5 days visa to enter my own country. And since then, there has been a progress. Definitely there has been a progress. There has been an opening in the country. That's why in 2015, after the NLD party won a landslide victory, we decided to open an office inside the country. And now we are thinking of contingency plan. How do we keep distributing, publishing the news and daily happenings in Myanmar? Because of the media has also been targeted. So that's also why I want to know that I want to call my editors in Yangon and these days. It was a very faint voice and very weak voice, sound very depressing. But at the same time, they're very courageous. They go out to the streets in spite of the risk, and they don't listen to me, taking precautions. But they really are going out and getting the footages and the news and stories, and because they want you to know. They want all of us to know what is happening inside the country. That is something I want to share here. Then I will take you back to 1988 now, as Argentinian has asked me to do few homework. In 1988, we have no internet, no cell phone, no smartphone, no social media, no network. And then we were out on the street at the time. I was a former student activist. And we have an underground, very few, handful underground network working. Like gathering on the streets, it took a huge courage because we know that the military or police will come out to shoot and kill us. And they will even send the riot police to have a first step and second step and third step, a crowd control system. And it took months and months for us to organize such an underground network, to organize the people and students to go out to the streets. And the communication is difficult. And we have to use paperwork and publishing and trying to communicate to each other. And now, if you look at this current uprising street protest, it was very quick, very fast, because also I think internet and the social media and the cell phones, and people and the youth are very organized and very united, and they don't take the very confrontational approach, and they save the energy and they save their own people, and then next day they prepare for their own strategy, how to take to the street, how to gain the momentum, not to lose the momentum. This is very interesting for us. Also, they are also very resourceful, not like in the old times. And, because they have enjoyed the openness last 5 to 10 years. And they have internet access, they have the social media, they've been abroad, and they have enjoyed this, even though it is a quasi-civil military administration, joint administration we call it, they have enjoyed that openness. And they've been abroad, they've been exposed, and they went to international school. And more importantly, sometimes, they have played internet games all the time. And now they are out on the game and on the streets in the war game with the real game with the military and riot police. If you look at the last 2 or 3 weeks, you can see how the kids are playing with the messages are very interesting, and they don't provoke them. And they have very beautiful, sometimes very funny messages, but you can see them. And the government and the military junta, I should call them a military junta because of, they don't want us to call the military junta. They want us to call the State Administrative Council. And we still refuse to call them a State Administrative Council, but we call them a military junta. Maybe we should use another word, honorable State Administrative Council, if they want us to call them much more honorable terms. So I think this time is very interesting. It gives us a hope. This Generation Z gives us a bit of hope. Things happen quickly. The international reaction, the press coverage, it took 6 months, maybe a year to get the news out in 1988. Hundreds of people were killed on the street at the time in Yangon. alone. There are a lot more people were killed in the upper north in Burma. But now it's very interesting to see that the youth are well organized. And they said, this is the final battle, they said, because if we don't fight again this time, we will forever be a slave of the military. That's why they took to the streets and then they fight. And also, I think they know that there has been a lot of slow progress. They may not be happy with the performance by the NLD government or Aung San Suu Kyi, but still, there's a hope. There's a future for them. Because I asked people, I asked some migrant people and those who voted for the NLD party, and then they said, every day, before going to bed, we cry. I asked them why. I know the reason, but I asked them why. Because we lost hope. Because even though the NLD has made a lot of misstep and a lot of policies that we may not like it, the performances, but still we think that there's a hope for us. There's a future we can enjoy. Because we don't want military, we don't want the old system. We don't want to go back to the old days like before. That is the reason that they take to the street. And they voted for the NLD, and in 2020, I think the NLD won a huge landslide victory, including Burma specialists, including journalists, including the soothsayers. They all they predicted wrongly on the outcome of the election. I mean, that the NLD has won the major, a huge landslide victory. That was quite a shocking, surprising for us. And also, Titina also asked me to explain a little bit about Tatmadaw, the military. I think we have to understand that they always see themselves as a guardian of the nation, the guarantor. And my time is up? No. Okay. Okay. I think we have to understand that they see themselves as a guarantor of the nation. And they will give you the disciplined democracy. They want to give you the controlled democracy. Even if there is a transition, it will be the guided transition, as a military guided transition, like in 2011 and 2012. They will open up the country, but according to their terms and conditions at their own terms. It's not by the civilians. That is what we have to understand. And also, I've been asked a lot of questions by the friends around, will there be breakup? Will there be split in the military? I really don't think so. There's no tradition. There's no history of the military breaking up because of the uprising or democratic uprising. They may have different opinions. They may be divided. But once they hear the word democracy, once they hear the word Aung San Suu Kyi, they all get united again. So we have to understand that this is the mentality of the military. And then they always would like to blame the civilian politician. They are the troubles. They have no capacity to run the country. A very complex and a very diverse and a conflict-ridden country. And we are the only one, the military is the only one to control the power and the economy and run the country. I think this is what we have to understand, that the military is a mentality, and it's very important. And that's why I think they drafted the 2008 Constitution. If you look at the Constitution, that provided them a lot of safe exit strategy for the military. Even this 2021, this military coup last month, they violated their own Constitution. If you read carefully, this coup or this attempted coup was unconstitutional because it's the president who has to hand over the power in case of state of emergency in the country. It's the vice president who was from the military faction who was given power to the commander-in-chief. Now the acting president is, since the day one of the military coup, he disappeared. He's missing in action. It's now the Commander-in-Chief, May Aung Hlaing, is the head of the state. So I think they themselves violated their own constitution. That's we have to, I think bear in mind that, understand that. And what the international community can do, I think first of all, I want to say the leverage. I think we have to understand the leverage. What sort of leverage? What kind of leverage we have? Who are the key stakeholders? Who are the either UN or US or China or Japan or ASEAN? I think with ASEAN, I think my brother Kobe will talk a lot about ASEAN. I think, but I think, and also apart from the leverage, I think language matters. What language we going to use to tell the regime that this is a time to stop killing the people. This is time to go back to the normalcy. I think language matter. I don't think regime is very care about concern and concern and concern. These are empty words. Even yesterday there was a cartoon. I saw it, I enjoyed it so much. They're saying that Burmese, somebody, I think a very famous cartoonist, he made a joke that we are worried for UN, we stand with you. We are very worried for UN. We stand with you. So people are just making a joke that UN is in action. They couldn't do much because they have seen it. Because we are going back to the episode 2 from episode 7. We have seen it. We are rewinding them, all the past ugly, bloody history of old days. That's why Burmese people know that there won't be too much action. It won't happen a lot. So they don't want to see the empty words. I think they want to see the action. What kind of action? What kind of symbolic action and policy could be implemented? And Biden's administration is now have a targeted sanctions. And what more can they do? I think there are a lot of like-minded countries in the region. I think Japan is the key. People think that China is the key, but I really think that Japan is the key because I think Japan had an ODA assistant. Japan has trained the Burmese military. And they have a very long-term relationship between the Japan and the Burma or Myanmar. And also people like Sasakawa and also the current Japanese ambassador have a special relationship with the military. I think these are the key points we have to look into. All these nuances we have to look into to see that if we want to push for the change, I think US and then Japan and ASEAN. And China, we keep hearing that if we push Burma too hard, if we punish Burma too hard, Burma will go back to China orbit. I don't buy that now. Because I think you have to understand that May Aung Hlaing himself is a very anti-China, not anti-Chinese. We are not anti-Chinese, we are anti-China. In our DNA, we are very suspicious of China. And May Aung Hlaing himself is anti-China. He has publicly spoke about the Chinese giving arms and logistic support to rebels in the north. He's been saying that for the last 2 years. If we know that, I don't think he is going back to China. And if you look at the Chinese today, China position today, we have seen a series of protests taking place in front of the Chinese embassies in Yangon. And Chinese are put in a very awkward position now. If you look at the Chinese ambassador who had to come out to make a statement that this is a situation, absolutely this is not what we want to see. And he also said that we maintain a good relationship with both the military and Aung San Suu Kyi. This is not a small statement, and it's very unusual, I think. That clearly indicates that China is put in a very awkward position. And this is a key that we have to take advantage of it. I think this is very important, I think. With that, I will stop and I'll take a question later. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Aung San. Look, you have the most, I think, direct experience and connection with what's happening in the country. So I'm going to ask you just a quick follow-up question. And what you describe, basically, the Gen Z, this is the digital natives, the younger demographics. This has an echoes with Thailand as well. And even now, there's been a lot of talk about the Milk Tea Alliance. So a lot of similarities. But what I want to ask you is, we can almost assume that the violence is going to exacerbate, right? And we're seeing that even just over the weekend. do you think it will end up the same way? What's your sense that, will the Tatmadaw will close ranks, hunker down, ride out the storm, kill a lot of people, maintain power, and get away with it? What's your sense? Is that going to happen like that?
I think I'm afraid to say that will be the end game. I'm afraid to say that. That will be the end game, I said. They will take over control, and they prepare to stay in power for long anyway. And there will be more bloodshed. One, the Burmese ambassador to UN, Jomoton, spoke. He took his position against the military coup. And the next day, we knew that in our DNA, we knew that there will be more crackdown. And as we expected, and then yesterday, there are a lot of people were killed. And I think military will come down with much more brute forces, arresting people, detaining people, and trying to decapitate opposition. We're trying to decapitate the NLD party. And they talk about voter frauds, but 2 days after the coup, they charged Aung San Suu Kyi with the illegal walkie-talkie. Doesn't make sense to me, And if it is voter fraud, why don't you just go and count the voter? But can you stage a coup because of voter fraud? No, you can't. So I think there are a lot of doesn't make sense to us that. So they've been preparing to take a power again anyway. So that's the reason that they are preparing it, and now they are in power, and then they're going to stay prepared to stay in long haul. My scenario is, in 2 years' time, as the commander-in-chief, promised, there may be an election after amending and tweaking the constitution. They even talk about now proportional representation, PR system. With that, they can hold the election without the NLD, and the commander-in-chief will install himself as a president. That's afraid to say. Okay. This is going to be one of my scenarios.
Yeah, thank you, Aung San. Look, that seems to be a game plan that they have in mind for sure, and it's not alien to this region. We've seen this a little bit of this in Cambodia, and you might even say in a more nuanced, sophisticated way in Thailand. So that's a very disturbing trend, and it looks very ominous. So we'll come back to you, Aung San. I'm sure there'll be questions for you. Let me move to Larry Jagand. Larry, you've followed Burma, Myanmar for a very long time, I know, and used to work at the BBC World Service with you as a casual at East Asia Today, and so you've written the column today and in many other writings. So maybe a couple of things from you. What's your sense? You spoke with Dr. Sasa, who is a spokesperson now for the committee representing the Pidong Suluto, the CRPH. And that seems to be now the kind of a parliament in exile that comprising a number of NLD MPs formed after the coup. So Dr. Sasa has some very interesting comments. What's your sense? And then in particular, so what's your sense of the NLD situation on the ground? But in particular, I think Aung San Suu Kyi, what's her role and place, and what's the future? She's 75, and where we are now. What do you think?
Thank you. I, as you said, had a long association, one way or another, with Myanmar. Or Burma, as I grew up calling it, and I'm trying to resist going back to calling it Burma. I have always tried to take an independent and detached view of what was happening in the country since the start. think it's very easy for us to feel that what's happening now is going back to the old days of the 90s or even the 80s. But it's a different environment, both internally, and as Aung San has pointed out, with the young people, the use of social media, the interconnectivity makes it different. And the international environment is different, and the regional environment. I was one of the journalists who predicted, in fact, that the NLD would win by 85%, would get 85% of the votes, because I have a network of young, unpaid stringers in the country, because I have a difficulty earning a living myself, let alone pay for people who are helping me. We interviewed over 1,000 people in the 3 weeks before the elections throughout the country, both young and old, equal division between male and female, and ethnics. And overwhelmingly, 85% of them said they were going to vote for the NLD. So it was no surprise. What was a surprise, and my attitude changed over the period of the election, was I suspected that there was going to be a poor turnout. A lot of people felt, first of all, they were scared of COVID and the restrictions. They were disillusioned by the NLD government and felt another 5 years of this, what's in it for us? They also felt that the NLD was going to win anyway, so why risk going out? So I thought turnout was likely to be under 60. Well, it was over 80%. And again, in the last week of sampling these voters, it was clear. Min Aung Hlaing's statement about the elections and about the role of the military motivated people. They went out to vote for the NLD. But in terms of the interviews we didn't just ask them who would they vote for, what did they want, why were they voting the way they were, and so on and so forth. And overwhelmingly, I would say something like 15% of the people said, Ma Suu, Mother Suu, we trust her. There's no one else who can do the good for the country. But the rest, they were voting not just for the NLD, they were voting for democracy, and they were all saying this. We want greater democracy, not less democracy. We want an end to the 2008 Constitution. We want a federal democratic state. So the aspirations that we're seeing on the street now were reflected in the votes, although obviously in a vote you vote for a candidate, not for an aspiration or an ideology, or, well, an ideology you might. And that's what we were testing in the 3 weeks before the election. So the desire for democracy. And some of them, unlike 88, had a clear view of what democracy was. And the difference between 88 and now is people in Myanmar have experienced something of a democracy, quasi-democracy I prefer to call it, but there's been rising expectations. They know what they can expect from a democracy, and they're hoping for it. And therefore, they're much angrier in many ways than 1988. They're much more informed than 1988. And they're very impatient. They're not prepared to wait another 30 years for change. So I think the situation is different. I've always said that the conflict between the NLD in 1988, when it began to emerge, or more like 1989, and then of course the elections in 1990, it wasn't a party. It was actually a reflection of the aspirations of Myanmar civilians for some form of democracy. They may not have known what it was, but for them, the NLD and Aung San Suu Kyi as a charismatic character epitomized that aspiration rather than political will. And that has been maintained through the 33 years since 1988. At the same time, the military understood that they had to find a way to rationalize their position. They had to find a way to strengthen their position, not in terms of military equipment and so forth. And what people haven't noticed is that in the period since, particularly since 2010, the Tatmadaw, although I prefer not to call it Tatmadaw because that's what the name they want to call themselves, have been building up military strength. They've been diversifying. They are an incredibly well-equipped military now. And of course, we know that their ability with cyber technology is perhaps as good as most in the world. It's a fallacy, though, to think that China has supplied it. It hasn't. They have relied on the Russians. They have the most sophisticated Russian systems. And after all, we've had 50,000 Myanmar troops trained in Russia over the last 30 years. So they know what they're doing. They're very well equipped. So for me, there was never any belief that the military were being altruistic and generous and giving over power to the civilian government, and they've maintained control. I think we have to remember that actually we've got this far because of Tan Shui. I mean, he was the one who actually introduced democracy to the country. Without him, we wouldn't have had the 2010 elections, and we wouldn't have had the 2015 victory for the NLD. I mean, we have to give him a certain amount of credit. Now, the reason that he and the military obviously were signed up to that, were prepared to go along that kind of path, was they saw that they had to win the hearts and minds of the people, that if they maintained what they had done during the 90s, they would become very insulated within their own country, and the economy would collapse, and virtually did. So they had to build more of a consensus. They had to reach out. This was their vision of democracy, guided democracy. I actually like Aung San's sibling democracy even better. I mean, this is actually how they see democracy. It's a sibling, and they are the parent to control. I think it's a wonderful analogy. So it's always been about control, maintaining control. After the 2010, there was an awareness within the Tatmadaw that while they were very good at security and defense measures and must be in control of them, they weren't very good at the economy. They weren't very good at social issues. And they looked to some extent to China as a model. Strict political control and social and economic adventurism, if you like. So they were looking for a system that would preserve that. They thought 2008 Constitution did that. In 2015, the conflict between Dorsu and the NLD, and the military intensified. The election result was a shock to the military at that time. They did not expect the NLD to win. In fact, I was being told by my sources in the military, don't worry, Larry, they cannot win more than 40% of the seats. In other words, we're going to have a coalition government, an interim coalition government, which is the 7th stage of the roadmap that was designed by Kin Yunt with Tan Shui's approval back in 2003. That is their modus operandi. That's what they wanted. People very close to Dorsu and very senior in the NLD have frequently told me since 2016, we did not know until the middle of March whether we were going to be allowed to govern. We did not know whether they were going to hand over power to the NLD. At that time, Dorsu was negotiating behind the scenes with Min Aung Hlaing and with Tan Shui, and was obviously in a weak position, or she felt she was in a weak position. She had to have the consent of the military to form the government in 2016. Well, they reluctantly gave it to her in a sense. But that conflict intensified the resentment between the military and Aung San Suu Kyi and the NLD. It was on both sides, because they understood that this was a struggle for power and a struggle over what kind of democracy Myanmar was going to get in the longer term. And that has been maintained. I think, from what I understand, the military view was, okay, give her 5 years. She'll fail anyway. The NLD can't do it as well as we can. There are splits in the NLD, so on and so forth. She won't be able to control the ethnic armies on the border. She'll fail in the peace process, etc. Some were even telling me, I just give her 12 months. Well, it was more than 12 months, as you know. And the election result was even more of a shock for the military this time. And they were looking forward. What happens in 2025? What happens in 2030? This is the second massive victory for the NLD at these elections. It's actually the third. Never forget 1990. Wasn't quite as big a victory because of the SNLD, but the popularity of the NLD has not changed in 30 years. As I say, one shouldn't see it as support necessarily for the NLD. It's support for democracy. It's support for freedom. It's support for a state and system that allows people to realize their potential. So, unfortunately, I mean, getting back to the Aung San Suu Kyi, I think, unfortunately, the NLD were a bit surprised at how well they did. They knew they were going to win, but this overwhelming victory, but not so much in the national parliament, but in the regional parliaments. I mean, there are some parliaments that there's no other MP except NLD. It was an amazing victory. I have to say, I got that wrong. I thought the ethnic parties would do much better than they did. I never thought they would be challenging, and I think, dare I say it, a little bit of extra arrogance crept into Aung San Suu Kyi's vision. She felt, we have beaten the military. No, this is overwhelming endorsement. I suspect even we've got them at our mercy. For the military, they thought the same thing probably. And what does that mean for us in the next 5-10 years? It means no longer will we have a shield to protect our military abuses in places like Rakhine. No longer will the NLD government allow the military sort of free rein. They'll rein in the defense budget. There'll be more accountability in the courts. They're already taking the police away from the Interior Ministry, which is controlled by the military. So they could see, which I believe was on the agenda, that there was going to be increased independence of the civilian government from the military. And in 2025, the USDP and those pro-military parties would be wiped off the board completely. They won't even have a small amount of seats. So they saw that. There was obviously a certain amount of trying to provide a legitimacy to what they were claiming, so that we get the election fraud stuff. Unfortunately, we don't know, or I don't know, what went on with the discussions in the week before the coup. But it does seem that Aung San Suu Kyi took a very hard line and was not going to accept a certain amount of concessions that they were demanding. The Tatmadaw, I think the flashpoint for the Tatmadaw was not actually Aung San Suu Kyi intransigence, was actually the international community's statement on the Friday. You cannot believe how angry people in the military were. This is interference with our internal affairs. And although one can argue that the meeting of the Parliament on the Monday was critical, you can't imagine just how angry they were at that statement, and that gave them the raison d'etre. It's international interference in our affairs. We are, as Aung San has pointed out, the guardians. As to Aung San Suu Kyi's future, I think it's an open book, and I happily answer questions on that later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Larry. Look, this is a very complex, situation, and you have alluded to the many undercurrents underpinning the coup, especially the 3 days prior to the coup. We'll come back to this, and also in particular, I want to know, what should and what will be her role? She's not been seen since the coup, so detained somewhere still. And that would seem to be, I think, the first condition of any kind of a dialogue or any kind of a deal that comes out of this. Let me move to Khun Kavi. There's also some questions already coming in, comments. Will the CRPH, should they be recognized by the United Nations? One question. Question about the ethnic insurgents. Would the ethnic insurgencies, would they kind of take matters into their own hands? And then the effectiveness of sanctions. Maybe the Myanmar armed forces already have foreseen that there would be these kinds of targeted sanctions, and they're willing to withstand it. So Khun Kavi, let me come to you. A lot to answer for ASEAN. I think so far tomorrow there will be an online ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting addressing this issue, and then we've had some shuttle diplomacy from the Indonesian Foreign Minister, and Myanmar is a member of ASEAN. This cannot look good for ASEAN. And what would you have to say? And then also maybe any leverage the sanctions from the international community. Can they be stepped up, or are they ultimately futile?
Well, thank you very much. I think, again, ASEAN is under focus. And ASEAN this time, as I have repeated several times, ASEAN will not defend Myanmar like it used to do. So, because ASEAN is different. ASEAN has the charter since 2008. And ASEAN has grown up and become more confident. So the handling of the crisis in Myanmar, especially tomorrow, will be extremely difficult because it will be a landmark to register to the world community the relevancies, the centralities of ASEAN. I have 4 points. I will be very short because I think there will be a lot of questions. The discussion within ASEAN tomorrow is, the first purpose is to open a platform of constructive dialogue with Myanmar regime, the new power structure. This is important because Myanmar has agreed to take part in this meeting. At first, when the idea was broached, special meeting, as you know, ASEAN tradition, they don't discuss the topic right away. It takes a long time. This is why the most important thing is when you want to decide, pass on judgment of ASEAN performance, please do not base on speed. You will fail. ASEAN is a marathon runner. It's not a dash. So you look at the outcome. 13 years of Cambodian issue. Cambodian was a symbol of ASEAN success and UN success. Took 13 years. So this crisis will take a long time. So the first one is to make sure there is a constructive dialogue happen between the ASEAN and Myanmar because they look ahead. I mean, it's great. We have our friends Larry and Aung San talking about what has transpired and what happened in the past. ASEAN has to look forward. So the second one is also very important. What kinds of messaging ASEAN want to send out to the world? People attack ASEAN as a talk shop, no courage, no guts protecting dictatorship. The young people, the multi-alliance, the younger generation want action, want ASEAN to condemn the military coup. And the answer, so what? What could you do? ASEAN will not think in that kinds of black and white mode. So what kind of messaging? So you have to wait. Tomorrow is very important what kind of messaging ASEAN want to send to the world. And this must come up with a consensus. I trust the chair. Brunei is a small country, never create any trouble, has never shown any maverick role like certain countries in ASEAN, very careful, very subtle diplomacy. So the messaging is important. The first one, have a constructive dialogue. Second one, messaging. And the third one, this is the one that nobody talk about. It will not serve as precedent in ASEAN. Everything ASEAN has done or did is a very special. So it would not set a precedent. That's the condition. That's why Myanmar agreed. This is why Myanmar agreed to attend, apart from submit to the ASEAN Charter and whatever the principle, respect of democracy, good governance, rule of laws, human rights, and blah blah blah. But it's important that it will not set any precedent. So the meeting tomorrow and the one that is been scheduled, a lot of questions regarding the so-called informal ASEAN ministerial meeting in August. That's a long term coming. I think that meeting is also very crucial because the meeting tomorrow will lay the groundwork for a much more tangible roadmap. I will use the word roadmap, you see, because, I think Myanmar, probably being neighbor of Thailand and study what the Thai has learned of the coup experience, I can tell you that in 2014 when Thailand had a coup, immediately Thailand dispatched an acting foreign minister to Naypyidaw to report and update willingly, voluntarily. And U Wano Muang Ravin was the foreign minister, was the chair. So he knew exactly what to do. So you expect to have something similar action. I have said, provide a constructive platform for dialogue, and then what messaging, and it must not be precedent. And the last point is very important, which has been emphasized in the chairman's statement, and this is the number 3 in the chairman's statement. And you have to give credit to all ASEAN members because the chairman's statement that came out from Brunei was not the chairman's statement in the truest sense of the word. It came from the input from all ASEAN members. The number 3 and the most important is that the instability of a member country will impact on the stability of the whole bloc. And that is a very clear message that ASEAN sent to Myanmar. So I think this is a very important 4 point. And we'll have to see what will happen tomorrow. And ASEAN will be very assertive. It will exert a lot of pressure. Certainly this time, ASEAN is a different, what I would say, it's a organization. Its centrality is at least, it's not a jargon. I mean, ASEAN really pretty serious, and it wants to show to the world that it can make a difference. And it's a difficult situation. As you can see, one of the questions that Ajahn Thitinan put forward to me about Thailand roles, Thailand is in a very difficult situation, catch-22. I mean, Thailand is not United States, can admit, say that we are blah, 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 and we will not do this and that. Thailand cannot. Thailand can only say a few words. And, the situation, when Myanmar has bloodshed in 2007, Thai government came out with a statement, criticized Tatmadaw, saying that as a Buddhist, as a former military leader, I could not accept what you have done using lethal. And I think there was some discussion within the top policy maker in this current government what to do, whether to come out with a statement to take note, to ask the current regimes in Naypyidaw to abstain from using force. And this is the point, safety and respecting the view and the interests of the Myanmar people. And I think the State Department has come out with a statement saying exactly that. And this is very important, and the Thai must show some position that is very concerned. You cannot go on and, killing people like that, and Thai is very aware. So I think if the regimes in Myanmar return to the first 2 days using cannon, much softer measure, and certainly release certain personality, for example, my friends, economists from Australia, tunnels, that will reduce the tensions, and then also try to work with ASEAN. And finally, the international community, as Aung San has alluded to, is very important. I think United States is watching. That's why Blinken immediately sent the message, knowing that Thai were under attack from the local media, social civil society attack the Thai, saying that why you are not coming out with a strong statement against giving your own history. I mean, you can do that, and then what? So I think Blinken's positive message was a lifesaver. It gives the Thai sort of A+ signal saying that, hey, you are doing a good job, stay there. So America is watching and trying to not to spoil the gourmet, and now coming out with the statements, emphasis the same point, waiting for ASEAN to come out with a position. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Kun Gui. Thank you very much. Let me ask you a follow-up question. Thailand in 2007 was a coup government.
That's correct.
Coup government. During the Saffron Revolution, it had a reaction to it. Singapore also used the word revulsion.
That's correct.
This time, very muted, very, very quiet, and it seems like they don't feel they have any moral ground to take a position. In addition, was the meeting between Retno Masudi and Wana Mongluwind in Bangkok, a kind of an endorsement of the coup by the Thai government? That's my first quick question. And then, on the ASEAN question, will ASEAN, you think, in your view, draw any red line on Myanmar's armed forces? Because what Myanmar has done has really lowered the bar in an unprecedented way, right? So if you look around Southeast Asia, there are, conspicuous or overt authoritarian regimes. There are also flawed democracies. You can make arguments, Philippines, Indonesia. I mean, no one is perfect around here. However, regimes in Southeast Asia, if you measure by the democracy benchmark, very flawed, but if you measure by legitimacy, it's more arguable, right? But in Myanmar's case, it's zero legitimacy. So it's very black and white. The other regimes are not so black and white because they're very nuanced and sophisticated. So you think that ASEAN would draw any red line on the Myanmar's upcoming actions?
Well, it's a good question, which I'm Secretary General and speak on behalf of ASEAN. Even ASEAN Secretary General could not speak on behalf of ASEAN. I don't think ASEAN will draw a red line, but ASEAN will send out a very strong wording for Myanmar to follow. First, the safety and the well-being of the Myanmar people, and stop war or violence. I think these are two issues. And ASEAN is very practical, will work with the people in Naypyidaw because they are looking forward and try to work out a solution. And I think you are correct. This represents a dilemma. This is why I said ASEAN will not defend Myanmar like it used to do. And Myanmar has to follow or submit itself voluntarily. And it has done so by agreeing to this tomorrow meeting and the meeting in August. And that it will be listening and ASEAN will not come out, the most important imposing position, it will come out with a sign of friendly peer pressure. And I think peer pressure within ASEAN is very powerful. ASEAN has no provision to kick out member, but ASEAN has moral authorities among peer pressure to force in the most direct way. And it did in 2006. Myanmar skipped it. So I wish I could speak on behalf, but I could not. Thank you.
Okay. Look, we'll have to come back to this. I mean, the leverage that ASEAN has, and this is really a test. This is the test of ASEAN's mettle. When we move to Ajahn Ramon, you're the only academic on this panel, and you've studied a lot about social movements, and there's a civil disobedience movement now, the CDM movement. How do you think it's going? I think the younger demographics and very effective, and the stories coming out of Myanmar are just amazing. The resolve and the commitment in the face of intimidation and state perpetration of violence. Well, where do you think the CDM is going?
Thank you. I think maybe I will speak 3 points. First is the strategy of the CDM. Second, I changed my mind since yesterday, actually 2 days before, that we cannot use the lens of 1988 to see the movement right now. They are very changing a lot, and the way the military are looking. And the third point will be what will we go forward with this. Aung San maybe help me a little bit. Maybe I start with the civil disobedience. I think people see the civil disobedience movement with the lens of the 1988, because we might start by the speech of Mingonai today after the coup, when he talking about that, okay, how do we respond? He have a short speech. And what he said at that time, talking about no recognition, no cooperation, starting the boycott, asking the government officer to do boycotting or doing something like resistance, and asking the civil society to come out on the Facebook and online, use the online platform as the cyber warrior way to show to the world, and lastly asking for the uprising. This is we see all along of this. But what the really difference from the 1988 is that this time, those who are the forefront is more with the government officer, which is we did not see it in the 1988 generation. Which is asking us that if the coup government cannot govern, what will be happen to them? And this is a serious issue in Myanmar right now. Otherwise, you will not see the situation of reshuffle. A lot of the member or the government officer at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Myanmar has been reshuffled. Around 100 people are asked to go back. I mean, those who post abroad asking to be back. This is one issue that we see. The second thing we see that the military have to deploy the military staff to work at the hospital, because right now the key forefront who disagree with the Myanmar is the medical staff. And they are the one who, mainly the forefront to fight against the COVID-19. And some who saying that I cannot stop working, but what they can do is that they do a lot of, there's quite innovative way to show the disagreement nearly every day. From us, we might see that we might see the issue of like 8 p.m. every night. Some people do that. The military possible already estimate, but what they do not estimate is that even at the small street or at the small city is also happen. If we look at the number who pass away because of the crackdown, right now I think it's around 28%, injury is more than 50, which is big difference comparing in the past. The difference is that at that time you will see the big city like in Yangon, but this time the crisis, start in Naypyidaw, which is the stronghold of the military, and that's very surprised them, and that's make them very worried. And that's why we see more and more violence. And I think it will be more violence right now. For me, the military use the old strategy. using the violence, the crackdown, create the anti-protester mob. I mean, they use the word like of the gangster and bring it or release Uvira too. But it doesn't work in that way, because if you see that how the public respond, maybe because of the social media, you will see the situation of call out of the net idol or television or even the actors. They have the case that one Food Panda brand ambassador in Myanmar saying something to support the military, and then the situation is coming out to the internet saying that they will not buy or order the food from Food Panda any longer. So basically, I think the new strategy this time is not only walking on the street or marching, but the situation changing to economic sphere, and that is very, important. I think today the central bank already ordered that we will not allow individual to withdraw the money more than 500,000 baht, which is, I think last week is still 1 million. Meaning that it's become serious. And also for the company, it should not be more than, 10,000 million baht or something like that. So I think this is a different strategy comparing with the 1988 generation time. And if you see, I think they already, those working with the CDM already released the name of the company that is, belong to the military or secretly belong to the military or associate with the military, the name of the director, and also, yes, if we looking at the, what you call privacy, you might feel that it's again the situation of the right to privacy, but for them, they think that the economic sphere is very important. So this is all the list, around 137 list of company, and also list of the name, and also list of the, affiliate company. I think this is the new strategy that happened, trying to dealing with the issue that for the ordinary people, even though they might afraid of the military, the way they crack down, they can do something. And I think this is will be happen for the military because they underestimate the way that it works. They might think, for me, the military just thinking on the same way, the old pattern that you will see a lot of protests, walking on the street, you use the violence, and then you disperse them, and then use the time for settle, and then that will be okay. But since the protester use a different strategy, they have to deal with multi-layer of the fighting. One way you have the people who walk marching on the street, but the other way you are dealing with the issue of the economy. So that's why the international have to come in. ASEAN have to think, will it will happen, or the UN. And I think the statement of the Myanmar ambassador to the UN is very important because it's create the domino effect in MOFA in Myanmar right now. And I heard, I need to confirm by Aung San, that they have the statement by former senior general Tan Choi, former President Thein Sein, and also Turachoyman, talking that, hey, can you speak with each other? Something like that, saying that the coup is maybe unconstitutional, which is very serious because this is the only legitimacy of the coup. They're saying that they do it according to the 2008 coup, but when the former, general themselves saying that it may be not constituency, and it may be constituent work because they're saying that the constitution does not allow when they draft the state of emergency, they do not intend for you to do like this. And this is very interesting. And the last point is that they're saying that the military should not play the role to talking about the problem of election. It should be the Union Election Commission to do that. It's not your role. And you should talk between the military and Dorsu, and the NLD should discuss each other. Otherwise, the way that they put effort for carving the country with the 2008 constitution will be, go down the drain. And I think this is true or not true. It might be an only rumor, but this show a lot of, the problem and fraction within the military.
Thank you very much. Very helpful. I think so. CDM this time, Aung San, unlike the 88 generation, they seem much more savvier and technologically driven, smart, and they seem to be aware of the military's game plan, and they're countering that with domestic sanctions inside the country at their own expense. Talking about sanctions outside, this is sanctions inside. I want to, these are all issues that we will come back to, and as much time as we have, but now I come to Gwen Robinson. So Gwen, if we have, there's a lot of talk about dialogue, what to do. Aung San Suu Kyi is not being heard of, Min Aung Hlaing is in charge. There's a committee representing the, Pidong Su Hut Law, and then dialogue. So if we look at scenarios going forward, what can happen here? The variables seem pretty clear.
Thanks.
The November 8th election results, what happens to them? They've been invalidated by the newly appointed, newly formed UEC, Union Election Commission. But that is on the table. November 8th, they had an election, landslide victory. Min Aung Hlaing, if anything comes out of this, the Tatmadaw seems to me would have to be involved as a variable for sure. But maybe not Min Aung Hlaing. What would happen to him? Exile, jail, persecution, legal persecution. And then what happens with Aung San Suu Kyi? Certainly she is a variable. So to have a way forward, to look at scenarios, the worst case I can think of is collapse. We don't want that. Go ahead, Gwen.
Well, I think you've asked all the right questions, and we don't have enough time to actually answer even half of those, but they're all excellent points. But I've got some ideas thought out, but I will just quickly address what you raised about the annulling of the election results. I do think that actually, for anyone around the world who refuses to recognise the legitimacy of this military junta, if you do not recognise their legitimacy, then you do not recognise their move to annul those results. So I think it's very much, this is what makes it so important now. There's been some pushback and bitterness about vague or strong UN statements warning of severe consequences, and other countries, including the US, warning of, extreme action against the junta. But sorry, unless it's military intervention, I can't see that any of those threats are going to actually be real, as in what sorts of actions can the international community take beyond sanctions. But one shouldn't discount, I suppose, the extreme cases are intervention or some kind of force, maybe ASEAN, but we can go back to that. I just think that the UN, the critical nature of the UN right now in this debate is whether they recognise, we've had the denunciation by the Myanmar's UN ambassador on Friday night, which is riveting. If you haven't seen it, I recommend, there's a short version of highlights, which is 1 minute on YouTube, but it is an extraordinary moment. And the junta was furious about it, and I think it added to the extra nastiness yesterday of the response, where you saw military units actually aiming into the crowd, like aiming to shoot people with live ammunition rather than crowd control shooting over their heads. So I think that did infuriate them, and it shows that it hurts. The junta deeply craves international recognition, which is why every day now the junta with its State Administration Council is sending out full briefs to embassies and governments, organisations around the world, long lists of what it's doing, what the meeting did today, economic ideas, stupid things like last week, the list on Thursday included Min Aung Hlaing's new plan to build an 81-foot marble statue in Naypyidaw, which is just what Myanmar needs right now. So just ridiculous things that they clearly are trying to convince the world that they can run this country, but increasingly it's very clear they cannot. So along comes the UN, its own UN ambassador, denounces the whole thing, calls for civil disobedience, calls for recognition of this fledgling group of elected MPs, people elected last November, called the CRPH, and has thrown the ball effectively into the UN's court. The UN will soon have to decide, do they recognise the junta, which will shortly appoint a new envoy to the UN. So that is a key moment. The current one, well, the one just dismissed, Chor Tun, was summarily sacked on the weekend in an announcement by the junta. So he technically no longer has his job, but it is entirely up to the UN whether they recognise a new ambassador. I think that's a very important dynamic. It includes UN processes are extremely complicated. The Security Council cannot override. That's a General Assembly decision, I think, about ambassadors. But up to a point, the Security Council is very influential in all other matters that the UN does, not so much General Assembly and votes there. So a resolution is highly unlikely if bypassed. President, China and Russia will continue to block any kind of robust resolution. But I also think there's some hope there, touched on by a couple of other panellists, which was that China has publicly shown some irritation, unusually, and there was an extraordinary interview by the Chinese ambassador to Myanmar. You may not believe it all, but he actually went very far in saying this is absolutely not what China wants. And I actually believe it. It is not that China does not want a failed state on its border, killing each other, and just every system breaking down in that country. China craves Myanmar as a peaceful, stable annex over its border, its neighbour, with all the conveniences that China wanted in terms of infrastructure and access to the Indian Ocean, hence its enormous infrastructure projects in Myanmar, which right now also stand in jeopardy given the way things are going. So it is in China's interest to try and support some kind of solution. Russia is a wild card, but I think if enough international pressure is piled on and it is tied to other more important agendas in China and Russia's eyes at the UN, there could be some sort of, we could see some movement on that front. So overall, just a couple of key points, and then I think I'll just give it to, I think we've got a lot of questions and a lot of things to say. Number one dynamic, I think this is a dangerous new phase we're seeing by the military. They were actually quite restrained for a month. We didn't see the kind of violence we saw yesterday. I think that was a plan to give it a month. I think they deluded themselves that possibly they could convince people that they can run the country. I don't think they really did want to start wholesale shooting, but actually these guys don't know much else, as evidenced by their attitude to crowd control. They can't even control a crowd without shooting live ammunition. So I think right now the decision is to switch up a gear and eliminate the protest movement. And we've seen it also in these extraordinary step up of arrests on the weekend. There was more than 500 people taken into jails, on Saturday and Sunday. So I think right now there's at least 1,300 people who've been jailed, but I think probably more. I also think the deaths and injuries are far higher than has been reported, but we're going right now by the UN figure of 18 dead and scores injured. So I think we will see extreme action. For the really critical question is how long can the protest movement survive? Food, money are running out. I think it's a fairly reliable figure that there is 1 million civil servants in Myanmar. 75% of them are not working. 75% have walked out or are not or cannot work for whatever reasons. That means hospitals, transport, power plants, even sewage and garbage services have ground to a halt. So actually, we're looking at a country that is imploding, and if not much, I mean, you can't see that it's going to fix itself anytime soon. The point is, though, with all those civil servants out, banking system paralysed, a lot of companies closed down because people are scared, there is no money. People are not getting paid. That means eventually they can't buy food. The movement, as you've seen in images, I think, has some extraordinary resources. I mean, you've seen the sea of coloured printed posters, Aung San Suu Kyi masks, hard hats. It was really heartbreaking, though, yesterday to see protesters on the street, unarmed, with pathetic little shields made out of tin drums, trying to stand up to brutal forces with live ammunition and tear gas and stun grenades, etc. But you can see the determination. People can last a long time, but do you think we could see them on the streets in 3 months' time? So I think that's really a factor. Time is running out for the civil disobedience movement, but I think time is also running out for the junta. They know, they can see, they're not stupid, although they are stupid enough to have the coup. I think they can see it's not working, and they are also facing this imploding system and trying to implement a kind of some reforms. God knows what was going through their head, but they can see that they don't have much time to convince the world. In fact, I think time has run out for them in terms of convincing people that they could be a viable government. And time is running out for on a number of other fronts. Also, I think the most critical question about timing is this window right now where they haven't killed everyone, they haven't locked everyone up, and there are still people out there and groups. Most important, I think, is this CRPH, the Committee to Represent the Pyidaungsu Hluttaw, which is the only vehicle right now, as far as I can see, that has some claim of legitimacy for the international community to liaise with. There's nothing else, really. Aung San Suu Kyi is locked up. All the NLD people who count are locked up or in hiding. This is just a small committee. It was only 15 MPs who were well, they swore themselves in on February the 4th, 4 days after the coup. So they swore themselves in a virtual ceremony, and they've grown a bit. There's now, I think, it could be around 20 or more, and hopefully more are going to join. They've appointed this representative. I gather Larry may have spoken to him. We've spoken to him at the Nikkei where I work, Dr. Sasa, but also we have this UN ambassador who's been dismissed sitting in New York. So there are dynamics there that could lead to something, at least, that the international community could liaise with. What power they might have going forward, I don't know, but maybe we can discuss it. I could see you nodding, so I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Gwen. Thank you very much. Look, I think we have some time for questions, comments now. We have a number of questions online. One is the role of the private sector in Myanmar and also in the region. What is their role for them? There are some questions from Myanmar names here about the role of the international community, whether the responsibility to protect concept can be relevant here, and at which point the international community can take a more assertive action. So I think that people are very concerned about the deteriorating, the deep dive into the abyss here. What we've heard, I think, from the panel is we have a serious, deadly brinkmanship here. Who's going to blink first? The Myanmar citizens, protesters, they are suffering a lot. They're being shot at, intimidation, suppression, but they are also carrying out strikes and civil disobedience in different forms. So the playbook from the military is an old playbook. We've seen this, it's an old playbook. We've seen this before. Old tactics, decapitation of leadership, detaining hundreds of them, and maybe dividing the movement from within, sending out the thugs, and then suppression, violence, and then that they hope would subdue the movement, and then they would then regain control, turn around, make the turnaround, and then come up with some kind of new rules and go to election, and then get themselves elected. That seems to be the playbook. Don't know if it will work in the 21st century, but it'll be, what we're seeing is just very dramatic kind of brinkmanship. So the floor is open to questions, comments from the audience here in person. Also, we continue to have questions from the online audience as well. Anyone here? Okay. If not at this time, we have a time for a couple of rounds. So maybe I'll just go around the role of the private sector, business, where in the last decade, and the big question to me is 1 decade enough to raise expectations? People have a stake in the system now, and they don't want to go back to the dark days. Enough incentives for them. So the private sector would be a leading player here. Larry, would you say a little bit something, and Gwen or anyone else? Just a little short answer, if you could, please.
I think the private sector is critical, actually. It's one of the sort of pluralist groups that the military are trying to get them on board. Now, most of you won't, but if you remember in 2004, when Kin Yunt was overthrown, the first thing that Thein Sein and Turashwe Man did was call all the businessmen together to tell them policy's not going to change, because Kin Yunt had been dealing mainly with the businesses for the triumvirate. They understand and feel that they had a close connection with the businesses. But it's a different situation now. When they called up the UMFCCI to Naypyidaw on, I think, the third day after the coup, half of them invited to not go. There have been resignations from UMFCCI. There is sort of dismay and disarray amongst the business community. And of course, some of the senior tycoons like Dorsu, Chit Kine are in detention in their hotels in Naypyidaw, being questioned. But there doesn't seem to be any real resistance. Perhaps there's passive resistance. Some of the business people I know have told their staff that we're happy if you don't come to work. That UMFCCI closed its offices. But at the moment, they're a passive bystander on the sides rather than taking an active role. But there could well be a very important role for them in the future.
Oh, if I could just weigh in. Yes, UMFCCI is the key body of companies in Myanmar, and it was very interesting that initially they were petrified and were very, very worried about taking a position on the coup. And actually, in the end, in an internal debate, about 30% of the executive committee there wanted to put out some kind of statement, and they were overruled by 70% that didn't. That would fairly well, I think, sum up the attitudes of Myanmar companies. There's about 7,000 voting companies that are members of the UMFCCI, but tens and tens of thousands more companies that are just members. So what's really interesting, I think, in the last few days is the number of companies that have signed on to a statement that was released shortly after the coup by the Centre for Responsible Business in Yangon, which was mainly signed by the big foreign companies in Myanmar, not outrightly condemning the coup, but expressing strong concern. No Myanmar companies signed on first. Now that list is growing, and there are some big names of Burmese companies on that list. So I would say that they have taken a decision now looking at how the country is imploding, and what really hurts business is the paralysing of banking and financial markets, also the complete paralysis in transport. So manufacturers can't even get goods in and out, which augurs extremely badly for Myanmar's exports. And just one more line is about the economy. I think even before, let's not forget COVID, which probably is exploding right now in the country, and we don't have any systems no one's doing the daily checks and reporting, so you've seen the protests and people, only 1 in 4 maybe wearing masks. I think there probably is some kind of explosion of COVID going on as well. But overall, I think that had destroyed the economy anyway before all this happened, and economic growth forecasts had been slashed, and at its best, Myanmar was expected to grow about 1.7% this year under World Bank estimates, but actually I think what we're looking at is sort of way down, -10 and below now because of this paralysis.
Okay, thank you. We have some questions now from the online, but I also say that with the civil disobedience inside the country and mounting sanctions outside, it would seem that Myanmar businesses and international businesses would be less likely to line up behind the military, right, over time. This is a very good question about the potential. One of the worst case scenarios in Myanmar is the breakup of the country, the so-called Balkanization of Myanmar, with the ethnic insurgencies, ethnic parties, the ethnic armed organizations, and the ethnic wars over the decades. And this has far-reaching ramifications for the whole neighborhood, China, India, Thailand, certainly. Tatmadaw has always been very centralized and very strong in the center. So if you think about countries with a lot of ethnic components, the center always has to be very strong in order to keep the periphery within, and to keep it as a union. They have the word union a lot. But if the center weakens, the periphery runs amok. We could see maybe kind of a breakup. Aung San, would you say something about that? The potential balkanization, breakup of the union, if things really get worse.
Well, thank you, I think we've been talking about the changing of Myanmar map in the next 20 or 30 years, 50 years. And because of China was so influential and also providing a lot of assistance and arms and other logistic support to the northern groups. That's one of the reasons that we've been talking about China's growing and being very assertive on Burma and Myanmar. And because of, as you said, Santa has been very weakened. And we can see that, the ethnic groups along the border areas with Thailand, also with China, and then they've been looking at this situation and very nervously. And one Miao like staged a coup. And some of the ethnic groups were being told in advance that we are coming to talk with you. We come in to make peace with you. During the Aung San Suu Kyi times, during the Aung San Suu Kyi administration, a lot of ethnic groups are unhappy because of they couldn't achieve the nationwide ceasefire agreement. They did not have a good time with the Aung San Suu Kyi administration and a new peace initiative program, where Suu Kyi has appointed. So it was very clever that even prior to the military coup, several ethnic leaders were approached by the military to say that something was going to happen in the country in the next week or two, but make sure that we are coming to make peace with you. And if you look at the statement released by the ethnic leaders a day or two after the military coup, they were very soft and quite vague. But after 2 weeks of seeing the CDM movement and naming and shaming and social punishment, and because of across the board, a lot of ethnic groups, not like in 88. 88, we have a certain numbers of ethnic minorities join the movement and uprising. But now, even in the northernmost part of the country, even in a small village in a Kachin state, there are people going out with a 3 finger, in the salute, and they're joining the movement. That was kind of shocking and surprising to a lot of ethnic leaders. Not only Miao Lao, who underestimated the strength of the people and uprising, but also I think quite a certain numbers of ethnic leaders also underestimated the strength of people. So that's why they've been pressured to make come up with a more stronger statement condemning the military action and military coup. If you look at the PPSD and other RCSS statement, they were pretty strong. But if you look at the northern groups, they were quite weak. I think it's because of China.
Yeah, we have a dilemma. You know, on the one hand, the coup has been very controversial. I mean, I think widespread global condemnation. Tatmadaw is under the scrutiny. But on the other hand, if the Tatmadaw does not survive and it collapses from within, that's also a problem. If it succeeds, it's a problem. If it fails, it's also a problem for the region. There's a question here. Okay, Madam Ambassador, please.
So, hello, I'm from the Kosovo Embassy, and I am the only or one of the fewest Balkan countries represented in Thailand. So therefore, I just wanted to make one observation and one question. The observation is that the reference to the Balkanization doesn't help much it makes the public more confused about what has happened in the Balkans, and actually it doesn't shed much light about what's happening now in Myanmar. Because to cut a very long story short, what happened in the former Yugoslavia, and this is what you're referring with the Balkanization, because the Balkans is 12 countries. It was like an act of will in 1918, and it was like a marriage with a prenup. And the divorce was violated unilaterally by one country, one regime of the time, Milosevic, and we know the rest is history. So the question is, I've seen by the netizens some Myanmar, some very genuine mea culpa about the attitude, the behavior towards Rohingya. So while I educated myself and learned a lot about what's happening in Myanmar today, I didn't hear a word about Rohingyas. Is there any turning point about the way that society has treated the Rohingyas, and is there any empathy now about them? That's my question. Thank you.
Okay, well, we refer to this as a potential breakup of the Myanmar Union. We'll avoid the word Balkans. The Rohingya, Larry, a little bit, just a quick comment.
Yes. I think people misunderstood Aung San Suu Kyi's position on Rakhine, and I think internationally certainly, and I think people are hopefully beginning to wake up. Not that she didn't make mistakes, not that she couldn't have taken a more stronger line and so on, but she had to deal with the military, and that's the key thing. Yes, her position probably reflected the majority of the Burma population. But if you look at the CDM now, and I spend most of my day doing that, there is a lot of support for the Rohingyas within the CDM. It may not be massive, but there are those who have said, we got it wrong on the Rohingyas. So there is some rethinking going on. But we're in the middle of a revolution. It's too early to be really assessing those sorts of things. But I suspect that afterwards, depending on the result, there will be a proper evaluation.
Okay, thank you very much. I think rethinking is a good way to capture it. There's a question. I'll just ask this very quickly to Ajahn Ramon. You know, the three-finger salute from the Hunger Games is catching on. I was in Thailand, and was certainly in Hong Kong before that, and now it seems to be a little bit pan-Asian, the potential for a pan-Asian younger demographics kind of uprising, if you will. And now we see a lot of this in Myanmar. Could this be kind of could it really catch on into a regional phenomenon of a kind of an Asian Spring, Pan-Asian Spring, three-finger salute?
I think they have some kind. I think we have to understand that those who are the youth in the CDM movement, they are not the poor. They are not the one who come out because Myanmar changing the banknote. No, they are the one who are talking about their future generation. They even sing the La Mislav, like when you hear the people sing, with the choral, and changing the language. So basically, they are not from the poor family. It doesn't mean that if they are the poor family, they will not fight. But I mean that if we use, since both of us are from the faculty political science, the resort mobilization will be big different from this time. They are from the rich family, or they are the one who believe that under the NLD, even though they may not like Aung San Suu Kyi, but they feel that their family will be better. So in that context, the analysis with the coup, saying that it's not about the coup itself, it's about that you destroy the possibility for us to be the future Myanmar. And this is the thing that they are really pissed off. And this time, and that's why they go to the right target, saying that, will the government being able to run the country, look at the situation of Irrawaddy Bank, the Myawaddy Bank right now. This is a serious issue now that the military may have to send their staff to run the bank if they cannot dealing with the issue of the economy. So for me, in short, the CDM movement this time, they are the one who quite educated and linked with the international community, and due to the Facebook and the page and the Twitter and Instagram, the way of their alliance is different.
Yeah, and the one common word that they use is future. It's about the future. And the same thing that they use here with the young people, about the future. Gwen, quick comment?
I just had to laugh about Narimon's point about the military sending military guys to be bank tellers and saying, yes, sir, would you like to make a withdrawal? I think that shows the extent that, the problem the military really has now. But I just wanted to riff very quickly off the ambassador's point about the Rohingya issue, and also Aung Za's reference to the ethnic organisations. I think one thing to bear in mind is I don't think anything has united Myanmar as much as this coup. So the Tatmadaw has actually inadvertently done something no other organisation or person has ever been able to do, which is actually forge consensus. Well, probably the most consensus we've seen probably in the country's history right now to the coup, uniting all kinds of, ethnic, working class, professionals, young. You've seen them all. It is extraordinary, the array of opposition, and that has to count for something.
This is
I just want to add that Gwen and Larry, that we expected a low voter turnout due to the COVID, but we knew that NLD was going to win anyway. But Senior General Min Aung Hlaing came out and made a statement, threat of coup, just before the election in November. And the next day, those who were sitting on the fence, they all went out and voted for the NLD. That's why even NLD leadership, they were surprised and taken aback, and they made a joke. Oh, we hired a public relation manager. What is his name? Senior General Min Aung Hlaing. That was a joke.
So it was a kind of an anti-military vote as much as a pro-NLD vote in many ways. There's a question here about, what should the Myanmar people do now, Aung San? And I'll just pose this broadly. But, the protest movement has included even establishment figures, family members of Tan Shwe, the big business tycoons. Some of these people now are part of the protest movement. So could this lead to a crack eventually within the military? Your view is says no. You said no earlier. But there's a lot of pressure on the Tatmadaw now, a lot of pressure from within, especially from within. And in that view, what should the people do? This is a very kind of practical question from a Myanmar national, I think. Anyone? Aung San?
Well, I think.
You have some experience from '88.
I think also Professor also mentioned that the CDM movement is very important. I think that put a lot of pressure on the regime because of the civil servants and the nurses and physicians and a lot of officials, even some police officer have joined the movement. In 1988, we had a police officer, an Air Force, and a Navy officer. They finally joined just before the military took power. So, but this time, at the early stage, the youth and the CDM movement could easily and mobilize those people to come out of the streets. I think that was not calculated in the regime and Mayor Line's playbook. Even though he's very delusional, he might have thought of duplicating from Thailand and Thai style. That's what we have seen a lot. He has been to Thailand for 11 times. Each time he flew back to Burma, I could imagine that he's thinking of, I could do something like this. I could do something like this. I think he should stop coming to Thailand. I really think, because I know that he has a very good relationship with some of the people and high-ranking officials here in Thailand, and I think he made a big mistake that he had a lot of wrong inspiration from Thailand, and he staged a coup. What he saw suddenly was a large opposition. So the point is, I think leverage. We talk about leverage. I think we talk about not to learn the legitimacy. I think that's also very important. The third part is I think the economies and the threats. There are a lot of business people in the private sectors have quietly joined the CDM movement, which Larry Minor have mentioned it earlier. Even I think very prominent tycoons who enriched themselves during the previous regime. They don't want to go back to the old system. They don't want to go back to the old days. I wouldn't name the names, but there are a lot of people in private sector who are actually financing the CDM movement. If you look at the placards, if you look at the posters, if you look at the language, the flawless English, we want democracy. We couldn't even write it in 1988. But here people come up with a lot of good, English and, flawless English in asking for demand and, requests and both domestic and international community. I've clearly indicated that they're very resourceful and they've been well financed. A lot of tycoons inside the country who might not like Aung San Suu Kyi's economic policy, but they don't want the military to come back to power. I think they are quietly helping the CDM movement. That is very important, I think. And also externally, I think Chinese has their own signature projects in Burma, BRI and CMEC and CMAC. I think how to put the China on board with US and Japan and ASEAN, I think that's important. Do not exclude China, but to put the China on board and to make sure that how we can achieve some kind of stability and return to the normal in Myanmar or Burma.
Thank you, Aung San. Just a quick comment from Ajahn Ramon, and I'm going to go to Gawi. Go ahead.
I think we might have to differentiate between Thai and Myanmar or something, which is I'm quite happy with the way Myanmar think. First, they do not separate themselves between civil society and political society, which is a big problem of Thailand. They already see that it's no problem for political society, meaning the elected MP to involve in the CDM movement. So that's why the committee representing parliamentary union, they can join the CDM. I think Thailand, we have a problem of purification, try to separate between political society, economic society, and civil society. This time, if we look at Myanmar, they do not think like that. They're saying that this is a problem that entwine into the democratic process. So that's why you will see the business tycoon and parliamentary people who elected involved. And I think what I'm looking to see in the future that how ethnic leaders make decision in the CDM movement. And I think this is very important.
Okay, thank you very much. Drawing on parallels and Similarities, Kun Kawi. I mean, Min Aung Hlaing is famously known to be very close to the late General Prem Tin Sulanon, who was the Privy Council President in Thailand, and he has had very good, close relationships with our military high command in Thailand. So, in a different time, Thailand would have been a key strategic kind of mediator in this kind of situation, but that doesn't seem to be in the offing. So that's just a quick comment from you, the Thai-Myanmar military connection, if you will. And then second, Pikawi, Kunkawi, just quickly, can this be an opportunity for China, United States cooperation, cooperative window, during the early Biden administration?
Well, it's a good question. It would take 3 days to answer. But just try to build on all the question. I think the Myanmar people can build on the liberalization. And this liberalization inside will reflect ricochet in the international community. In 1988 to 2007, all the external pressure create the state, the liberalization. Now the liberalization, as Naramon mentioned, Aung San mentioned, it will ricochet to external players, including China, including United States, or the ASEAN dialogue partner. And it will reflect back to ASEAN. And that will create some sort of a division of a good cop, bad cop. The reason why I raised this is that internal leverage by Myanmar people, the strong aspiration, never stop protesting peacefully, will create extra pressure for external party to come out with a stronger measure. And then ASEAN will take up that pressure and say that, hey, listen, back in 2008, if you remember, psychonarchist, the Western country, the French, the Americans said that we will intervene, we will drop humanitarian aid inside the country if you fail to cooperate with our proposal. I remember Dr. Surin Pisuwan discussed with in Singapore with ASEAN foreign minister, with Myanmar foreign minister participating, saying that if you don't do it, you're going to get real trouble because Western intervene. You cooperate with us, we will help you. So we will work together. That is why Myanmar agree. So you have a so-called tripartite group coming in, Myanmar, ASEAN official together with international community. This time it will be a little bit different. Internal factors, the unifications of all forces, the private sector, the civil movement, the media, especially, will come together and create such a strong pressure for America. America is waiting to see ASEAN. Also, I think China will also corroborate to ensure that stability and the view of the Myanmar people got fulfilled. So I think this will be bad cop, good cop, and in between force the junta to accept the whatever tangible that ASEAN will have to handle. That's my take. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We have time for just one last round of comment and or questions. Anyone from the floor? Please, just tell us who you are and then make it brief, please.
Hi, I'm William Santos from the Embassy of Brazil. Just to confirm, Mr. Larry said that maybe today or tomorrow there's going to be a video meeting from ASEAN. Is it confirmed under Brunei's leadership? Brunei is leading it. Okay, yeah. And what do you see of the limits of this meeting? What can ASEAN ask right now immediately? Can they eventually ask for liberation of some personalities? What are the limits of what they can ask right now immediately?
Okay, thank you very much. Any other question, comments? Please, Jim Stent. We'll take this as the last one.
Jim Stent, outstanding discussion this morning. Question for Aung San and for Larry Tagan. If the situation persists for a while and the military continues to be highly repressive in a violent way, what are the chances that young protesters would do what young protesters did in Thailand in 1976 and take to the hills and organize guerrilla resistance? Is there any chance that would happen, or is that unlikely?
Okay, thank you very much. I think you have some direct experience there, Aung San. Before I come down this way, I'll just say this as a last kind of question, and you have a minute and a half each to address any way you'd like to. So what we know what's happening. It's a coup government, and we know what's likely to happen. Tension, confrontation, brinkmanship, probable bloodshed. Now, what would we like to see happen? What would you like to see happen, Aung San? How can we kind of get out of this, or how can Myanmar get out of this? We know what's going to happen. What would you like to see happen? And in view of the questions about going to the jungle, fleeing to fight another day, go ahead.
There must be a way out, I think. There must be an exit strategy. I think we need an exit strategy for both Mayor Aung Hlaing and the elected government. I think the question was, before the coup, I was asked by the former U.S. ambassador, my former colleague. He asked me, is it avoidable? Was it avoidable? Or both sides are to be blamed? So there was a question I encountered. So I think there has to be a way out, but I don't know. But what I see is the future is not that bleak. Even though we don't want to go back to old system, old days. But whatever happened in last month, after the military coup, things are happening very quick, not like in '88. That gave us a hope, at least, even if it's a fainter one, if it's a hope, because of, I think either U.S. or Japan or China even, ASEAN, they were swiftly involved in this, even though there are a lot of different approach and different opinion. But I think that's still okay. We will come down to the settlement, I think, one day, soon, hopefully. And inside, I think there has to be sustained momentum. The movement will continue, I would guess. Because of the movement, not like '88 or 2007, it's very resourceful. I think it will continue. And your question about the armed resistance, well, I think not armed resistance, what will happen? That I myself walked to the border areas in '98 after the crackdown, after seeing the crackdown, full of emotion and full of anger. And I became a journalist. I continued to work for the country and the people and my readers. I found a different path to help the country. I think we want to see the peaceful settlement, and there has to be a way out. Even now, those articulate, very cosmopolitan and very educated, middle-class youth, those who join the CDM movement from Yangon, they've been asking their parents, like my mom in 1988, encouraging them to go out to the streets and join the protest. Quite amazing. And they were saying last night that we might take up the arms. We might join with the ethnic groups to fight back. I don't think that's a solution. I think that's a way out. And there has to be a peaceful settlement. But there has to be, we have to understand the nuances. We have to give the exit strategy for both sides, I think. But nowadays, things are still not boiling. When the things that calm down, we will find a peaceful settlement.
Okay, thank you very much. So timing is also key. Let me just come down for 1 minute each of last remarks, Larry, and then...
I've got 4 points. First of all, I think there's a misunderstanding of the CDM. It's been given sort of credibility as the umbrella of everyone that's opposed to the coup. The political parties are not part of that. Rank and file might be out on the streets, but the CRPH is deliberately keeping away. It's a bilateral approach to trying to bring down the regime. They're very conscious that there has to be a political wing within the country. That is what's different to the 90s. There is a vibrant alternative government being formed. I do think that in the long run, the CDM and the CRPH will win, but I worry about what the cost is going to be before then. In terms of international intervention, international pressure, I'm afraid the less the US and the West does, the better. You only harden the military's position, and there's less likely to be discussions and negotiations. It has to be China and the region, China, ASEAN, Japan, and India. And thirdly, although what we've seen, particularly over this weekend, was horrendous, was absolutely horrendous, and I was in tears most of the day because a lot of those kids that I saw being shot at were friends of mine, my students over the last 10 years. But it is not nearly as bad as it has been in the past. The military has been relatively restrained. I know that seems a contradiction given what we saw certainly yesterday. And there is a debate going on within the army, within the top echelons of the army as to what to do now. There will be no split in the army. It will be a unified position. But there are hardliners who are wanting to actually use maximum force. Min Aung Hlaing, believe it or not, is one of the softliners, although he's obviously being pressured by the hardliners. Those civilians who are in government are trying to be more imaginative, although they're not suggesting give in to the movement. At the moment, it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen, but I fear for the worst. In terms of the movement taking up violent action, it's already been discussed. I know that members of the CDM, particularly the Milk and Tea Alliance, are talking about using cars and vehicles to ram the police. One of them told me, we know where their weakness is in terms of their formation. However, they've been in touch with their alternatives here in Thailand and in Taiwan. I'm being told, whatever you do, do not use violence. And I have to say, I think that is the most sensible advice that can be given to the campaigners.
Yes, non-violence itself can be a weapon.
I think no violence is not enough. I think now the role of ASEAN is under focus, and ASEAN is the only option. It will take time because you need a lot of consensus. And I think the regimes in Naypyidaw know that ASEAN will be the only option. So I was a bit different from the Larry in the sense that external pressure must continue very tight to form a justification for ASEAN to step and to force Myanmar to comply and so that all three is not two to tango anymore. It takes three: the international communities, ASEAN, and also the Myanmar regime to work out. We have to look into the future. I think the ASEAN is practical in the sense that you cannot look back. You have to look into the future, stop the carnage, and also to make sure that stability is being stored. For example, the Thai behind the scene makes to make sure that there's no influx of whatever refugee resulted in COVID-19 and many others, 4 or 5 million in Thailand. So ASEAN is the key. But the way ASEAN works, you have to be patient. Okay, look at the long term, look at the outcome, not the speed. Thank you.
1 minute of last remarks, Ajahn Naramon.
I think first we might have to understand in terms of the CDM movement, I think we need to understand that they are the ones who are not, this is a kind of politics of hope because they see that from 2011, this is a 2021. So within 10 years, they see a lot of change. And I think one thing that if we're talking about internal and external, foreign direct investment is already poured into Myanmar, and they are not the same so no one would like to go back to the old situation. But not only about the situation of how the military run, but for them they see that the way that the NLD run the country is allow the middle class to be able to establish. So this is a very important when we look at the true political economics lane. Under the political economy, this is why they use answer saying that yes, we are afraid of the violence, but we are afraid that how long under the military rule, how our life, which will be start to be emerging, will happen. And the second thing, I think ASEAN is very important, especially Singapore, because it is the country that put a lot of money in the direct investment, and I think foreign reserve money of Myanmar is in Singapore bank, so basically ASEAN is very important. And that's why the movement know, that's why they really force on the economic issue.
Last minute.
Last, I hope not least. One thing we didn't really, and I understand why, because there was so much to talk about, we didn't really explore the Aung San Suu Kyi question of what we do with her. The point is, I think that she may have, she's sitting there in detention and about to face trial again. Second hearing, I think, is tomorrow. And she's clearly, for a lot of the protesters, as we've seen with the posters, she clearly has huge sway over them. The younger generation, not so much, but I think any solution would have to either include her or have her endorsement, because she has the power to call on people and they respond. And this is partly, as just before she was arrested, she did urge people to resist this. But my dream scenario, which some people will poo-poo, is that there would be some element in the military that would possibly either have a counter-coup or work within and try and undermine. But I have to reluctantly, I may agree with Larry that if the military is solid. I don't know. We've seen some extraordinary defections or denunciations by the police in the last few days, notably on the weekend, a major who's the highest ranking officer yet, to have a very powerful video denouncing the coup and joining the movement. So that it's not all lost.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much to all speakers. I'm very sorry that we've run out of time, not having more time, but also sorry for being over time by a few minutes. So please join me in thanking all the speakers here for their time and expertise. Thank you very much.